Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe and support me. The barren expanse of exoplanet 89 stretched out beneath the dull, reddish sky, its surface a hostile mixture of jagged rock and shifting ash. A low wind howled through the distant mountain ranges, a constant reminder of the planet's harshness. Dr. Sarah Collins, head xenobiologist for the mission, adjusted her visor and narrowed her eyes at the horizon. The strange, faint glow she had detected from orbit was unmistakable now, just a few kilometers ahead. "Everyone stay sharp," she called through the comlink, her voice crisp and steady. "We don't know what we're dealing with yet." Behind her, the rest of the crew moved in a cautious formation, a mixture of scientists and engineers, all hand-picked for their expertise in deep space exploration. Dr. Marcus Gain, the mission's lead engineer, trudged forward, his heavy boots crunching in the ash, while the others followed in silence. It had been days since they landed, and so far, the planet had proven to be just another lifeless rock until now. The glowing objects had first appeared on their scanners 2 days ago, small, pulsating masses that emitted a low-frequency energy signature, completely unlike anything they had encountered before. The mission had pivoted instantly. What had started as a simple survey of a desolate planet had become a full-scale investigation into the unknown. "There," Sarah said, pointing toward a series of low mounds rising from the ash. Nestled among them, dimly pulsing, were the objects. She squinted through her visor, trying to make sense of what she was seeing. They looked organic, like hexa or at least something close to it. Each one was roughly the size of a football, with a faint bioluminescent glow emanating from within. Marcus came up beside her, scanning the area with a handheld device. "Energy readings are off the charts," he muttered, frowning. "I've never seen anything like it." The rest of the team gathered around, staring at the objects with a mix of awe and apprehension. Sarah knelt down beside one of the glowing masses, reaching out cautiously with a gloved hand. She tapped the surface gently. It was soft, almost gelatinous, but firm enough to hold its shape. The glow brightened slightly at her touch. "I don't like this," Marcus said, stepping back. "We should report this and wait for backup." "This is beyond our scope." Sarah shook her head. "We don't have time to wait. We need to collect samples and study these now. If we leave, there's no telling what could happen or if these things will still be here when we get back." Reluctantly, Marcus nodded. The rest of the team set to work, carefully extracting samples and documenting the strange objects. They packed the samples in sterile containers, loaded them onto their transport, and returned to the base they had set up a few kilometers away. As the team unpacked their findings in the temporary lab, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of unease settling in her chest. The glowing masses were like nothing she had ever seen before. She stared at the containers, watching as the glow dimmed slightly, reacting to the change in environment. "All right, people," she said, turning to the team. "We'll run tests on these immediately. I want full reports by morning." The group dispersed, each member focused on their tasks, but tension hung heavy in the air. Marcus lingered beside Sarah as she began her initial examination of the samples. "I'm serious, Sarah," he said quietly. "Something about this doesn't feel right. We should have called it in." "There's no protocol for this." Sarah glanced at him, her eyes hardening. "I know, but we're the first ones here. If we crack this, it could be the discovery of a lifetime." He hesitated, then nodded, walking away without another word. That night, as the base's lights dimmed to their nighttime settings, a strange sense of quiet settled over the team. Dr. Emily Fisher, a biologist known for her meticulous work, sat alone in her quarters, reviewing the initial data on the glowing masses. She couldn't stop thinking about the objects, how they pulsed, how they reacted to touch. There was something almost a broken bar alive about them, as if they were aware of the world around them. Without realizing it, Emily found herself standing in front of the storage chamber where the samples were kept. The soft, green glow seeped through the cracks in the door, casting an eerie light on the walls of the dimly lit hallway. "Just one more look," she muttered to herself, overriding the security lock with her keycard. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and the glow intensified. Emily stepped inside, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't quite explain. She reached out toward the nearest container, her fingers brushing against the cold glass. Her head felt light, her thoughts foggy, as if she was moving in a dream. Her hand moved of its own accord, lifting the lid from the container. The glowing mass pulsed and HFY then split open with a soft, wet sound. Something wriggled inside, small and delicate, like a worm or a larva. Before she could react, the creature leapt from the container, attaching itself to the back of her neck with a sharp, sudden sting. Emily gasped, her body seizing in shock, but she couldn't scream. Her vision blurred, and for a moment, she thought she was going to black out. But then, just as quickly, the sensation faded. Her body relaxed, her thoughts settling into an eerie calm. She blinked, staring at the empty container in front of her, and slowly, mechanically, closed the lid. By morning, no one noticed anything wrong with Dr. Emily Fisher. She went about her tasks as usual, her expression calm, her movements smooth. But Sarah, ever the sharp observer, sensed something off. Emily was quieter than usual, her responses clipped and robotic. When Sarah pressed her about the samples, Emily brushed it off with vague answers, something that was entirely out of character. "Is everything okay?" Sarah asked during their midday break, her voice laced with concern. Emily paused, her eyes distant. "I'm fine," she replied, her tone flat. "Just tired." It was enough to put Sarah on edge, but she chalked it up to the stress of the mission. After all, everyone was feeling the weight of the discovery, and strange behavior wasn't uncommon in high-pressure environments. Over the next 2 days, however, Emily wasn't the only one acting strangely. One by one, other team members began exhibiting similar behavior. Dr. Alvarez, the lead geologist, who had always been meticulous and detail-oriented, became sloppy in his work, often leaving tasks unfinished or disregarding protocol. Then there was Lieutenant Bishop, the mission's security officer, who started avoiding direct eye contact and began spending long hours in the sample chamber, muttering to himself. Sarah confided her concerns in Marcus during a late-night conversation in the control room. "I don't like it," she said, pacing restlessly. "Something's happening to them. It's like they broken bar changing." Marcus frowned. "You're overreacting. People crack under pressure all the time. It's probably just fatigue." "Fatigue doesn't make someone act like a completely different person," she shot back. "And it's not just one of them. It's almost half the team now." He sighed, rubbing his temples. "What are you suggesting, Sarah?" "That the glowing objects are some broken bar infecting them?" "I don't know," she admitted, frustrated. "But we need to figure it out before it gets worse." That night, Sarah sat alone in the lab, analyzing the latest test results. The glowing masses showed signs of rapid cellular division, almost as if they were preparing for something. Her eyes flickered to the containment chamber. It had been 3 days since they brought the samples on board, and the changes in her team were becoming undeniable. As Sarah studied the data, Marcus burst into the room, breathless and wild-eyed. "They've taken over communications," he gasped, panic creeping into his voice. "Emily and Alvarez, they're blocking our messages to Earth. We're cut off." Before Sarah could respond, a loud crash echoed down the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, methodical, and deliberate. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the sound of footsteps drew closer. Her mind raced, adrenaline surging as she grabbed Marcus by the arm and pulled him toward the back of the lab, where a small door led to a secondary hallway. They had to move quickly, quietly. Whoever or whatever was approaching had already compromised their communication systems. If they were discovered, it might already be too late. Marcus's face was pale, his usual calm shattered by the realization of just how deep the infection had spread. He glanced at Sarah, eyes wide with fear, and for a moment, Neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. The unspoken truth between them was enough. They were no longer dealing with their colleagues. The footsteps stopped just outside the lab door. Sarah held her breath, praying the thin wall between them would be enough to keep them hidden. The door slid open with a hiss, and the dim glow of the hallway lights spilled into the room. Sarah could hear the faint sound of breathing, a heavy, deliberate. A shadow moved across the room, its silhouette distorted by the flickering lights. Sarah's heart raced, each second feeling like an eternity. She pressed herself tighter against the wall, willing herself to be invisible. Marcus stood frozen beside her, his hand trembling against the control panel. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the footsteps moved away, fading back down the hallway. Sarah exhaled slowly, her pulse still pounding in her ears. She motioned to Marcus, and they slipped out of the side door, entering the narrow corridor that led deeper into the base. "We have to figure out what's going on," Marcus whispered, his voice barely audible. "If they've taken over communications, they'll be after the power grid next. They'll cut the lights, life support to everything." Sarah nodded grimly. "We need to get to the command center. If we can override the security protocols, we might be able to lock them out of the critical systems." They moved quickly through the dimly lit corridors, the weight of the situation pressing down on them with each step. The base was eerily quiet, as if the infected crew members were silently watching, waiting for their moment to strike. When they reached the command center, Marcus immediately began working at the console, his fingers flying over the keys. Sarah kept watch, her gaze darting between the hallway and the security cameras, half expecting one of the infected to burst through the door at any moment. "There's a firewall breach in the system," Marcus muttered. "They're trying to take control of the environmental controls. If they shut off the oxygen or the power." A loud crash echoed from down the hall, cutting him off. Sarah spun around, her heart leaping into her throat. The sound of footsteps, some more of them this time, grew louder, approaching rapidly. Marcus cursed under his breath, his hands moving faster across the console. "We don't have much time," he said. "I'm trying to isolate the central power grid. If I can lock them out." The door to the command center slid open with a sharp hiss, and three figures stepped inside, their movements unnaturally stiff, their faces expressionless. It was Emily, Alvarez, and Bishop, once their colleagues, now puppets of whatever alien force had taken over their minds. "Marcus, now!" Sarah yelled, backing away from the console. He slammed his hand down on the control panel, and the lights flickered for a moment before stabilizing. The infected crew members paused, their heads tilting slightly as if assessing the change in the system. Then, without a word, they lunged forward. Sarah barely had time to react as Emily rushed toward her, hands outstretched. She dodged to the side, grabbing a heavy piece of equipment from the desk and swinging it with all her strength. It connected with Emily's shoulder, sending her stumbling back, but the blow didn't seem to register. Emily's face remained blank, her eyes cold and unfeeling. Behind her, Marcus was grappling with Alvarez, trying to keep him away from the console. Bishop moved toward Marcus with alarming speed, his movements precise and mechanical. "We have to get out of here," Marcus shouted, his voice strained with effort. Sarah swung the equipment again, this time connecting with Emily's head. The impact knocked her to the ground, but Sarah knew it wouldn't stop her for long. She rushed to Marcus's side, helping him fend off the others. Together, they managed to shove the infected crew members back far enough to escape through the side door. The infected gave chase, their footsteps echoing ominously behind them as Sarah and Marcus sprinted down the corridor. "There's nowhere to go," Marcus panted, glancing over his shoulder. "They're everywhere." "We need to get to the lab," Sarah said, her mind racing. "We can figure out how they're being controlled. If we can find the source." A sharp pain shot through her neck, cutting her off mid-sentence. She stumbled, her hand instinctively reaching for the back of her neck, where something cold and slimy was latched onto her skin. "No," she gasped, her vision blurring as her legs buckled beneath her. Marcus grabbed her before she hit the ground, his eyes wide with panic. "Sarah, stay with me." But she couldn't respond. Her body seized, her muscles locking up as the parasite burrowed deeper into her nervous system. She could feel light and icy, foreign presence creeping into her mind, invading her thoughts, taking control. Her vision went dark, and for a moment, she was sure she had lost. But then, in the darkness, she felt a spark of defiance. She wasn't going to let this happen. Not to her. Not to Marcus. Not to anyone. With every ounce of strength she had left, Sarah fought back, focusing her mind, pushing the alien presence away. It was like swimming against a powerful current, her thoughts slipping away with each passing second. But she held on, refusing to let go. Slowly, the pain began to recede, and her vision cleared. She was still on the ground, Marcus kneeling beside her, shaking her shoulders. The parasite was still there, clinging to her, but she had regained control at least for now. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice weak but steady. "I can still fight it." Marcus helped her to her feet, his face a mixture of relief and fear. "We have to move. They'll be back any second." They continued down the corridor, Sarah's body still trembling from the effort of resisting the parasite's control. She didn't know how long she could hold out, but it didn't matter. They had a job to do. When they reached the lab, Sarah immediately began scanning the alien samples, her hands shaking slightly as she worked. Marcus stood by the door, keeping watch, his eyes darting nervously between the hallway and the security monitors. "I think I've found it," Sarah said after a few tense minutes. "The parasites are controlling their hosts through a neural network. They're all connected somehow like a hive mind." "So how do we stop them?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with urgency. "If we can disrupt the connection or sever the neural link, we might be able to free the others." "And how do we do that?" Sarah hesitated, her mind racing. "We need to overload the system. If we can send a high-frequency signal through the base's communication array, it might be enough to break the connection." Marcus nodded. "Then let's do it." They hurried back to the command center, the infected crew members nowhere to be seen for now. Sarah quickly recalibrated the communication array, setting it to broadcast the signal she had devised. "Are you sure this will work?" Marcus asked, his voice filled with doubt. "No," Sarah admitted. "But it's our only chance." With a deep breath, she activated the array. The base hummed with energy as the signal pulsed through the air. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the infected crew members began to stir. Emily, Alvarez, and Bishop stumbled, their movements jerky and uncoordinated. Their eyes flickered with something of recognition, confusion. But before they could fully regain their senses, the base's system suddenly went offline. The lights dimmed, and a loud, ominous hum filled the air. "They've taken the power grid," Marcus whispered, his face pale. Sarah's heart sank as the gravity of the situation hit her. They had broken the connection, but now they were completely vulnerable. A cold realization settled over her as she watched the infected crew members, still swaying on their feet, caught in the limbo between control and freedom. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot.